Today, I'll be returning to my Overwatch World Cup series, where I look at who's been confirmed for the final 7-man rosters of different countries. Now earlier on, when I started making these videos, I said that I planned to do it in seeding order, but as you've probably realised, I've skipped past both Team France and Team USA, the 4th and 5th seeds. These two will be put on the back burner for the moment, as they've only released their top 12 rosters, and are yet to announce their final 7s, with France seemingly not making their announcement till September, whilst Team USA's final team selection remains up in the air. So putting them to one side means that today, I'm on to discussing the confirmed final 7-man rosters of the 7th seed Team Australia and 8th seed Team Sweden. Starting with the Aussies, they stuck to a more familiar schedule of releasing their roster and began by announcing the top 12 for Team Australia this year. At tank, the two that made it were Trill and Punk. At DPS, the players selected were Yuki, Huss, Winter, CKM and I Eat Up, whilst the supports chosen were Face, Tongue, Unter and Georgiation. For the most part, this top 12 that was selected made reasonable sense, especially at the tank position, where the two candidates and most experienced options were given guaranteed spots in the lineup, allowing for more trialling and debate around some of the more competitive spots on offer. Of course, some of you may have already spotted that when I say top 12, I actually should say top 11. Goomba explained why this was the case, as well as some other decisions I'll get onto in a minute, in a tweet into it longer, which I'll leave a link to in the description. Initially, they'd selected Sign, the extremely talented DPS talent who has dual citizenship of Australia and New Zealand, which is also why he gave me a headache in terms of my Who Makes Overwatch World Cup series. He was originally the 12th member of the Australian lineup, which was submitted to Blizzard, but Goomba decided that in the end, he didn't have anything extra to add to the side, or offer aside from weakening Team New Zealand. So consequently, he was allowed to go play for them. But this didn't leave them enough time to fill this final spot, which Goomba said would have likely have been handed to Fluoro. There are some other interesting areas about this top 11, starting with the support position first. It was very surprising to see Face selected as a support, as to my knowledge, he was working as assistant coach on Talon Esports, and wasn't still playing, which did confuse me a little, especially with a player like a Kraken missing out, but I can understand this decision in terms of his recent form. At the DPS position, the main surprise from those that they announced was that CKM was back in the conversation after coming out of retirement, which universally I think everyone was happy to see, given how talented of a DPS player he is, and this probably occurred with the imminent arrival of 222 Rollock and the end of Ghosts. Not long after, however, Team Australia officially revealed their final 7-man roster, which brought a few surprises with it. Unsurprisingly, at main tank was Trill, with the same being said for their flex tank Punk. The DPS selected were I Eat Up and CKM, whilst at support, the pair of Tongue and Unter were picked, with a surprising 7th spot being handed to Face as an extra coach. I don't think I'll discuss the tank lineup much, as they were clearly the top two of their respective positions for Australia, and were highly predictable picks to their roster from the outset, so I don't think anyone can have any arguments here. Moving on to DPS, however, it was interesting to see CKM make the final 7, given how recent his return from retirement to the scene was. Goomba explained that despite this, he was still incredibly talented at a variety of heroes, whilst others only had smaller hero pools. And whilst Winter was the most likely alternative, he lacked the competitive experience in comparison, which is why he missed out. I Eat Up and Unter are understandable choices, and with his recent form, so is Tongue at main support, especially when factoring in Goomba's preference that the players picked are from overseas or Western Australia, so they can have the best connection to Team Australia's scrims that normally would take place against Korean contenders' sides. Of course though, this leads us to the elephant in the room when it comes to the final 7 of Team Australia. Face's selection instead of a 7th player. Now at first, I can understand people's confusion by this, but I can totally see where Goomba is coming from, and it's understandable given the circumstances. He cites 3 main reasons why taking a 7th man wouldn't necessarily be worthwhile. Firstly, Australia is less experienced than other regions, so a substitute with less scrim time will not perform in his opinion. Secondly, there was no heroes that he felt were not covered by the current roster as it was, so flexibility wasn't an issue. And finally, there are no players on the current roster who he's unsure of, so he doesn't think the team will need insurance. Add to this the benefit of bringing on an extremely talented coach who's no stranger to success, with only those in the final 7 and committee getting expenses paid for by Blizzard. Consequently, this lineup is a little different to how I anticipated it would be, so I only predicted 4 of the 7 players correctly. That said, I think the Aussies have a competitive lineup with good experience, but depending upon who they face, could potentially sneak into the BlizzCon groups through preliminary qualification. Moving on to Team Sweden now, and they also release a top 12 in a more regular pattern, with 2 players running at each position. The final 4 fighting for a tank position were Lulsish, Slinky, Elivot and Nevix. At DPS, the 4 who made it were Snillo, Rat, Urki and Danid, whilst those remaining in the running at the support role were Gustav, Luddy, Bokwon and Ebbs. This at a first glance seems to be completely reasonable top 12 for Team Sweden, with few complaints to be really had. I think it was a shame that Malatin missed out, but when he's going up against an incredibly talented Elivote and Nevix, I can see how he missed out in the end. Equally, I personally would have had Monk Mutter, at least in the top 12, as I thought despite Clockwork Vendetta bowing out of EU contenders playoffs, he was reaching his peak form at the time with some nutty Hanzo displays that appeared to make him a great pickup in his current meta. With his flexibility between DPS and support, it may have actually harmed his selection chances in the end, with Swoosh likely prioritising specialists at their positions. And again, I mentioned how frustrating it was to see Sharp miss out this year, because he's too young thanks to the change of the rules meaning you have to be 18 or over to compete. From this top 12, the final 7-man roster was unveiled not too long afterwards, and it included Lulsish at main tank, Elivote at flex tank, a DPS trio of Snello, Rat and Urki, and a support pairing of Gustav and Epps. Let's start with what can't be debated about the Swedish side for this year. Obviously, whilst there were some talented alternatives at the tank position, bringing in the tank duo of Lulsish and Elivote makes the most sense and was the obvious choice from the start in my eyes, with their quality and synergy a definite reason for their selection. They should do excellently for Sweden on the tank line this year. Of course, Snillo was a lock from the start really at DPS, and I can't have any complaints in regards to the inclusion of Epps either. As I said way back when I made my Who Makes Team Sweden video, it was really close between him and Bok1, so looking back over some recent trials, I think he'll be a great addition to the side. The first point of contention, however, comes at the main support position, where to many people's surprise, Gustav was picked over Luddy. Luddy clearly had the edge in terms of experience and was many people's favourite for a spot on the side, including myself. But looking back over the tryout scrims, I think Gustav did play quite well. And clearly, if the coaches think he's a better choice for the side, perhaps in terms of his hero pool he plays, then I can't complain with his inclusion here. Potentially, the only other point of contention could be over the final choice of Rat and Urki alongside Snello, rather than Danid. To be perfectly honest, I can understand the inclusion arguments in the case of all three players, so I can't really be upset with the final choices of Rat or Urki, who performed well enough to make the team, although it does mean that Danid does unfortunately miss out, but let me know who you would have selected. This also meant I finished with 4 out of the 7 correctly predicted players again, which is alright, but not as good as the past few teams that I've covered. But I think this final 7-man roster for Team Sweden this year could do very well, especially if their veteran Snillo turns up and the tank line performs to their potential. They should be competitively targeting a BlizzCon spot. And with that, we reach the end of my Team Australia and Team Sweden final 7-man rosters video, and I'd like to thank you for watching. As usual, I'll be back tomorrow with my weekly updated power rankings, so if you enjoyed and don't want to miss out, please like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for this continuing competitive Overwatch coverage and content. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.